Welcome to this very, very interesting, we hope. I mean, I'm not bigging it up, but I think it will be interesting. Um, Zakat seminar and webinar with Mufti Faraz Adam. It is obviously 5 p.m. We are in that, where the airline is coming into land at Heathrow Airport, aka the iftar. So we're going to be hitting you with some heavy zakat calculation just to kind of put you to sleep. Um, no, we won't do that really. We'll spice it up every so often, just as you're nodding off. We'll chuck in a bit of admin fees, or we'll chuck in something else to keep you entertained. Um, Mufti Faraz, you need no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. So you're one of the, mashallah, preeminent muftis and scholars in Islamic finance, particularly in zakat. You've been, working on zakat-related topics for many, many years now, and I think you recently left NZF on a full-time basis, but you've been, you help out every so often, particularly I guess around Ramadan. And today, what we're going to be doing, so firstly, welcome
جزاك الله خير.
once more. And then, inshallah, what we'll be doing today, guys, is we'll be going into, firstly, what zakat means to us personally, and why should we give zakat in the first place? Should we give it locally or not? Like, have we gone too far? Are we giving too much locally these days? And then we'll get into the nitty gritty of zakat, like how do you actually calculate it? Then we'll get into some of the specifics around, zakat on business assets, cryptocurrency, what kind of investments you're making, how you're supposed to give zakat on that. We'll have our annual standoff, Mufti Saab, on zakat on startups. And then we'll get into Q&A. So make sure, guys, if you are tuned in, to send in your questions and answers, and we will get those picked up as well. But without further ado, Mufti Saab, um, what does zakat mean to you personally?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a brilliant question. And you know what? Zakat is so dense, it's so deep that it can mean so many different things to so many different people, right? Every zakat has a story in everyone's life. Either you've been a beneficiary, either you've been a payer, either you've seen somebody who's benefited and who's been uplifted with zakat, or you've seen the impact of zakat in an economy, right? So zakat can mean so many things. But for me personally, the way I really like to understand zakat is it's like my membership fee to Islam, right? I mean, zakat has something inherent in its connection to Islam because it's a pillar of Islam, right? And we talk about salah, we talk about fasting, all these actions that we have, they add to Islam from a different dimension. And I guess that's what we have to explore. That if we want to build Islam and we want Islam to be apparent and to be manifest and to support people's lives and for it to shape in people's lives, we have to think what's the connection between Salah and Islam and how does that manifest? What's the story behind Hajj in Islam? What's the connection between Zakah and Islam? Right, because there is a connection between all of these things. But I guess we just haven't. Sometimes perhaps we're so concerned with the calculation, right, that we don't take a step back and look at the bigger picture. That what's actually happening here. And I think that's really important as a community, as a group of scholars, as groups of students of knowledge. We sit down and think, what is zakat doing? Because, and you and I discuss this all the time, right? We have to have a vision. What do we want to achieve with zakat for our community? What is it? Is it going to be haphazard continuously? Is it going to be such that we're just making payments without any strategy? What are we trying to achieve in the long term? Or is it simply look, everybody just try their best and let it organically just develop and grow, right? Which is also a plausible kind of idea. But there's something just to think about, I guess.
Yeah. And do you think, Mufti Saab, that we've kind of, I don't know what it was like historically, but these days I feel like maybe we've veered too far into becoming, Ramadan Muslims, where everything happens in Ramadan, fasting, zakat, if people could go on Hajj in Ramadan, I'm sure they do that as well. If they can't, they go on Umrah at least in Ramadan. It all happens in Ramadan. And then after that, you're back to your shaitani ways for some people. Um, what was it like? What was it like historically? And is our relationship with zakat just become like a little bit, I don't know, warped because as a result of that?
No, it's an interesting thing because look, in Ramadan we know the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hadith in Sahih Bukhari is that he would become so generous in Ramadan. There's a hadith mentioned about giving zakat in Ramadan, the virtue of that, right? And naturally, because Ramadan is a virtuous month, Allah's mercy is showering down upon us. We want to do more good deeds, right? We have this natural inclination to do more. And so we want more reward, we want to do more, and perhaps that's why everything has become concentrated in Ramadan. But yes, as a principle, zakat is not connected to Ramadan. Zakat is, it can be in Shawwal, it can be in Sha'ban, it can be in Rabiul Thani, right? Zakat is your personal calculation that you need to make and a payment that you need to make at any point in the year. And I always say this, it's funny how most of us, we became wealthy on the first of Ramadan, like in one go, right? Because if we're all paying on the first of Ramadan or the 27th of Ramadan, from a zakat perspective, you're supposed to have your annual zakat date, and that date is when you actually first became wealthy, right? But it just seems that we were all wealthy on the 27th together, that the barakah was too much for on that day, right? But yeah, it's one of those things. It's done, right? Now let's make sure we do it properly then.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mufti Saab, when it comes to giving zakat, you've been in the in the kind of charity sector, zakat sector for a while now. Um, you know, why, firstly, should we, be giving zakat as Muslims? And should we be giving it locally or internationally, or, what should be the mix? How should we prioritize?
Yeah. So on your second question first, I guess, right? Um, I just always advise that from a fiqh perspective, zakat can be given overseas, right? There's no denial of that. It's mustahab to give locally. It is encouragement to give locally. But if there's a need overseas or in any other part of the world, like an emergency that would happen, like for example in Turkey, then of course giving it is no problem whatsoever. It's absolutely fine. But yes, there's something about zakat was collected the prophetic way, and with as many hadith to show us that zakat worked as a local system to support those who are local. And although it's not a fiqh thing, but rather just for us to be able to benefit and feel what zakat is. Because zakat was, you'd walk out your house, on the way to the masjid, you'd see somebody who's struggling. You'd give him some zakat there. You're going to the marketplace and you see somebody there struggling on the way. You'd empower them with zakat. It's a bond that's created.
Mm,
It's a doing thing, it's a feeling thing. Right now, zakat, the problem with zakat right now is it's become a transaction for the most part, right? For us. It's like, and even the websites make you feel like Amazon, right? It's like a checkout. The way it's designed is like checkout, the
mm,
cart is there. So it makes it feel like, and I guess for them it's like the user interface, user experience thing. They're looking at more from that the customer journey perspective. But then we have to take a step back and think, and this is what I personally try my best to do when I'm paying my zakah online. I'll pause, I'll think what I'm doing, I'll make dua, I'll make the payment, I'll stop again, make dua to Allah to accept it, and just take a few moments to think about potentially who you're helping. Because we don't get that side. It's like same thing with your udhiyah and qurbani, right? When Eid comes, we can't even touch an animal, touch a sheep, let alone slaughter. We
mm.
can't even our people we can't touch anything. Whereas in the other parts, the whole idea is you create that connection, that bond with this animal, you look after it, and then only for the sake of Allah you are slaughtering the animal. There's no other incentive. Rather, you don't want to do it because you have an attachment, but you're giving Allah's love preference over your love. That's where the meaning of sacrifice comes, right? And so same thing with zakat. There's a feeling to it, there's an experience to it, which we perhaps don't really experience much now.
Yeah, and I suppose this is where to some extent people like NZF National Zakat Foundation, they've been working on stuff, right, where you can track your zakat and see it go to the local community. I guess that's a step in a direction for our time.
Correct. Yeah, at least your there's some visibility the more visibility, the better, right? Nowadays, so it's good that you're getting some kind of understanding. Look, you're helping somebody. This is the people you're helping potentially. That gives you some comfort. There's some kind of connection with the recipient, and it's not just something that you're just paying. Because what's happened now, zakat is treated just like charity, like any other charity, where it's actually more than that. We're supposed to be building a bond and bridge between the entire community.
And instead, sometimes we end up breaking bonds,
Yeah, and burning bridges, right? And
which is
sadly,
which is the deep irony of it all.
mm,
So, Mufti Sahab, before we get into some of the more knottier subjects, should we just lay down the groundwork for how you actually go about calculating zakat? And I should preface that. So I think Mohsin was worrying about calculating our zakat uh, a week or so ago, and so I've said, yeah, don't worry, I've been sorting it out all year. Uh, but yeah, this is a live discussion for us as well.
no, no. So look, it's very easy. You simply just add up the total value of the zakatable assets that you have. So if you have cash, you add that up. You have gold, silver, you add that to your calculation. Just make a spreadsheet or a table, wherever works, and then you take investments. Now, investments is where everything goes a bit tricky, right? But any investment which is you clearly is buying and selling, add the entire amount in. That's straightforward. So you've bought some shares and you're only reselling that. There's no other intention. You're fixed and firm on that. It's zakatable, and you're trading, right? You're trading shares. It's zakatable. Or then you have business stock as another thing. You have a business, all your stock, you take that, its retail value, you throw that into your spreadsheet. Money owed to you. For example, you lend somebody money, or you sold something on credit, you add that into your spreadsheet. And so these are the typical zakatable assets that we would have nowadays, right? Of course, within investments comes pensions, but perhaps we can unpack all of that in a short moment. You add all that up, any of your debts that you have which have been incurred and due within the next 12 months, you can deduct. So I owe council tax, I can add that in and deduct that from my total assets. I've bought a sofa with 0% interest for 12 months and I intend to pay over 12 months. I can put that into my calculation, deduct that from my total assets. I'm left with my net zakatable assets, and I simply pay 2.5% of that as zakat. Simple as that.
Alhamdulillah. And so, Mufti Sahib, we've already started getting some questions. So perhaps I'll pick up one of these and then I'll carry on going. Someone is asking, Najib is asking, is zakat permissible for social works, i.e., hospitals or clinics?
Yeah, so zakat can't be given to hospitals and clinics directly, like as the direct payment and beneficiary. What happens in many parts of the world is where it seems as though hospitals are benefiting from your zakat. Really, what's happening is the patient is giving consent for his zakat to be given to the hospital. That's what's really happening. And so it's the patient, the beneficiary of zakat, who's actually permitting, and so he's still getting the zakat, but he's saying, look, use my zakat on my behalf for my operation. So that's fine, but a hospital or a clinic cannot directly, without any intermediary of the patient or beneficiary, receive zakah,
And why is that?
because it's just not from the categories of zakah. Allah has defined for us who can receive zakah. Zakah is something. Look, we have many different forms of giving in Islam. We have waqf, we have sadaqah, we have qard, we have zakat. Zakat is like, you could say, at the bottom. It's the most strict. Then everything else is built on top of that. Zakat seems to be like this, the final kind of net to catch people. It's there that nobody should go beyond this baseline. And so it works for people and is given to the people to make sure. And so if zakat was able to be given to hospitals, clinics, and masjids, and this building and that building, very likely people will be left out. You have awqaf, you have sadaqah, you have all these other things. Infaq, you have these different forms of payment that can go to other places. It's not a problem. Riba, right, that you have to need to dispose. It can go to other places. But zakah is very specific, and that's a divine wisdom. And it's a pillar of, as I said, it's a pillar of Islam. It has a connection to Islam, a person's Islam. right? So a clinic is just a clinic, but zakat is something personal. It's person to person, it's human to human, and that's where we build bonds and build bridges, and that's where iman is built.
No, makes sense. Mufti Saab, there's a number of questions coming in, some of which I'm actually looking forward to hearing your answer to as well. But before we get into that, let's cover off the bread and butter. These days, the bread and butter is cryptocurrency.
Oh yeah.
So we start with that. Cake, right? Cake. There's pancake and all of these. So it's
Yes.
basically bread and butter, isn't it? So zakat on crypto.
Yeah, zakat on crypto. So look, if you are trading crypto, that's what you do. You're just buying and selling. You're not really concerned with the tokenomics or the kind of like underlying value proposition of a particular crypto. You're just holding it purely to trade and make a return. Then zakat is due upon the entire portfolio, like how we do with shares. But if you are more interested in the long-term value proposition of a particular crypto, you actually believe in the underlying project, and so you're holding this token because you believe it's a store of value, but at the same and the value is being derived from the project that it's connected to. In that case, then you need to look at what is this token in particular. Is it a payment token? Is it a utility token? Is it a governance token? Is it a asset-backed token? What type of token is it? Once you've worked that out, then the zakat treatment will follow. So, for example, if it's a payment token, and what do we mean by that? We mean that this crypto was designed purely to function as a payment system or a medium of exchange. Then typically the advice is you pay zakat on that. You just treat it as currency or money for zakat purposes, and you pay zakat on it because it serves no other function. If it's a governance token and you've just taken it to be part of this cool project, yeah, it's a store of value for you as well, but you're not selling it, you're holding on to it. There is no zakat on the governance token then. Utility token, similar again, because it's utility, you're holding it to be part of a particular project. It's a store of value for you, but it has an actual utility that can be used. There's no zakat on that either. An asset-backed token is interesting because tokenization is really gaining traction now, and there's more and more people exploring tokenization. Many things, almost anything, can be tokenized, right? So in that case, we need to look at what is being tokenized. What's the underlying asset? It's like securitization, right? In other words, so if it's gold that's been tokenized, of course you'll pay zakat because gold is zakatable. If it's real estate that's been tokenized and you're earning a dividend or a rental income, then of course on the token value which represents the property, like a REIT or unit trust or something, there is no zakat, but the dividend income that you gain, there is zakat, right? So that's how it will work in the crypto space.
Makes sense. There's a lot of questions coming in about investments. I guess that's to be expected on our channel. Zakat, but before we get into that, Mufti Sahib, let's get into let's just kind of outline for a businessman. Let's say you're Fareed, the businessman who runs a fish and chip shop, and
Wrong example, not right now. You got 1 hour to go or 2 hours to go.
let's say you've got Fareed, the businessman. He runs a itar shop.
Okay.
And he's been flogging the itar hard over the last year, and he's now got he's got a bunch of itar sat in his shop worth about, I don't know, 50,000. His cash in the bank is about 50,000 as well, but he owes maybe about half of that to his creditors or whatever. And he's coming up, and he's worked out that his zakat, the zakat day is the 27th of Ramadan. How do we calculate that?
So he's a perfect Muslim, and for him, it'll be his zakat will be on 50,000 only because he's got 50,000 pounds worth of stock. That's his retail price that he's selling at, right? He's got 50,000 pounds of cash in the bank, and we're assuming he needs to pay to his creditors all within 12 months. So you add the 50 minus 50, you're left with a sum of 50,000, 2.5% off 50,000, which I'm not going to ask you right now because I don't know myself.
1250.
Yeah, and that's it.
Alhamdulillah. And can he set up a direct debit to
You
do
could
that?
do well. Initially, look, the advice is always pay zakat as quick as you can. But where it's difficult, perhaps the sum is large, you can then pay monthly and just clear it out before the next zakat date that comes.
Right, Mufti Saab, we're gonna have our annual startup question.
Oh wow.
Uh,
You know, I'm still startups, I'll be honest with you, right? Before you even ask the question, I've been thinking about this a lot because the startup investment arena has been growing tremendously, right? And Zakat is a big question in there.
hmm.
So yeah, now ask the question. Go on. I just put my preface there just to take it a bit. Go on, take a step back.
So, folks, the issue is that if you've got let's say you've got Farid, the ITER guy. He's now come up with I don't know, some kind of ITER app, and he's raised £3 million into his business to make this the next like ITER marketplace or something, and uh, and so in a year's time he's probably still got maybe 2 million sat in his bank account. Um, his As part of the fundraising, Farid needed his shares to vest as well. So he kind of, before he used to own 100% of the company. Now the investors have taken 50%, but then he himself, his shares are vesting slowly. So he now owns, like, let's say 12.5% of the company. So you've got about 37.5% shares in limbo. You've got 50% owned by investors, and you've got £2 million sat there, of which he will need to be using at least another million in the next year for just ongoing costs that he will have. Um, Now the question is, if we apply the classic business zakat calculation on him, he would have to pay £25,000 in zakat. Um, but that, given that it sounds like a lot of money, to have a £2 million, but actually if you're burning 150, 200,000, that's actually quite a lot of money.
Mhm.
So that's the the issue. So the question is, Mufti Saab, does a startup need to pay zakat on all of the millions of pounds they've raised?
Yeah. Look, until now, and I typically advise people treat it as a business, pay on the net zakatable assets to your best of your ability, right? Whatever you can afford, you pay. What you can't afford, you write it in your will, and you simply try to defer it until you can later on. If you can pay £10 a month, you pay £10 a month. If you can pay £20 a month, you pay £20 a month. Pay the zakat. That's the first view, which I still am inclined to, but I'm exploring and seeing, is there other ways to treat this particular startup investment? Perhaps, for example, in the Maliki school, there's an idea of the muhtakir, where a person he buys something, he withholds onto it and sells it after many years. There's only 1 year's worth of zakat, right? Now we have to ask, like, that idea concept, does it fit? Ask other scholars, and there's a lot of work to do just to understand that for startups in particular, because it is a real challenge. And I know this because I've spoken to so many founders, and people always raise the same question. But until now, that's the typical advice that I give. Just try your best. If you can't, and if it's beyond your capacity for each shareholder, then you just simply pay whatever you can, right? And then you just have, like pension, the same advice that we give in pensions. Pay what's within your capacity. If it's beyond your capacity, then you can just pay a small amount and write it in your will. Why is that the advice? Because zakat was always, look, zakat's not meant to be a burden. The idea how zakat worked was, zakat was af. You know, this in khudh al-af, this in the Quran, or qul al-af, that take the af amount, right? Which is like is that you're trimming off the surplus from an asset which you already have. That's what you're doing. So zakat was taken from the very assets that you had. So it was never a burden. You didn't have to source liquidity to pay zakat. It was the assets themselves servicing zakat. What's happening today in many of these investments is a person is having to source that liquidity from elsewhere to pay a zakat on an investment which he has no real access to. And that's a challenge, because now there's a mismatch right there between, and so that's a real challenge in today's time, which I think needs to be really looked at and worked upon.
Yeah. No, Jazakallah khair for that. I get, if someone's asking, is does a company need to pay zakat? So that individuals pay zakat, right, Mufti Saab?
Correct.
And that's actually, this is the key issue here with startup investing, because if you think 25,000 and a million is okay, fine, you can do that potentially. But if you're paying 25,000 and you own half of that, and your salary may not be very much. Like regardless, even if your salary is like
Yeah.
100,000, you would be paying about 10 to 12% of that in zakat, which is could be quite sizable.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so folks, the answer there is try your best. If you can't, then Mufti Sahib, you don't take any bribes, do you, in this sort of
No, I just write it in your will. That's the honestly, like, at least you're covered
yeah,
as long as it's in your will, right? Because that's the main worry. The main worry is we don't want to go to Allah with a something outstanding.
yeah.
So just write it in your will.
I've had a bit of a brainwave. Maybe what we do as a startup community, all of the Muslim companies get together and we buy a 10 million pound mansion for the duration of, let's say, Ramadan. Um, it doesn't really work, does it? Because you can get through your zakat date, but it's kind of but I guess that does work. It's like a bit of a healer, isn't it?
It is a healer.
Yeah.
Exactly the healer. You're trying to avoid. This is a classic zakat avoidance or zakat evasion here.
That's it. All right. Well, we ignore that. Cut that from the stream, Khizr, uh, and we'll move on. So, okay. So we've covered zakat on businesses. We've covered zakat on startups. I do want to turn to some of the zakat controversies
Yeah.
because that's the thing that I live for these days. But before we do that, let's answer some of the questions where people have been very patiently waiting. So Kaz Mataz, I love the names, by the way. Like, I don't understand why normally in real life people are called like Waqas Ahmed, but that on YouTube or something they're called Kazmataz, uh, which I think is quite cool. So is it permissible to give zakat to someone who has wealth above the nisab level? Mm,
Yeah. Yes. So no, according to the Hanafi school, it's not permissible to give somebody zakat who has wealth above the nisab threshold.
Um, Hums MS says Huzrat. Don't know what that meant. Um, Omar Khan, is it permissible for a Hanafi to follow the Shafi'i rules on zakat? Just asking because I feel the Shafi'i principles of having to hold the asset for a year fit better with how I invest.
Yeah, well, the Shafi'i principle isn't really holding an asset for the year, right? How it works is you look at what you've held. So just say you have £1,000 in your bank account and it's fluctuating in the year, you'll just pay zakat on the minimum balance in the year because that stayed with you. So it doesn't mean that you have to physically hold business stock for a year or anything. It's just you take the minimum balance, that's all, and you pay on that, right? In essence. But you should follow the Hanafi school. You should carry on following the Hanafi school because you're going to mix up the rules here.
Makes sense. Um, and the Hanafis are the best anyway, aren't they? So it's
No, to be honest, look, when it comes to zakat, I find the Hanafi approach the easiest to understand, especially when it comes to like uh, distributing zakat, because the Hanafi school uses the nisab threshold to identify eligible recipients. Everybody else uses the kifaya, the sufficiency test, right? Like how you have means testing kind of thing, right? It's very difficult because that you have to contextualize, understand. There has to be studies. It's not easy. Whereas Hanafi is very very easy that you can implement immediately.
لقد زان البلاد ومن عليها إمام المسلمين أبو حنيفة
MashaAllah. That's it.
بأحكام وآثار وفقه كآيات الزبور على الصحيفة
MashaAllah.
فما بالمشرقين له نظير ولا بالمغربين ولا بكوفة.
MashaAllah.
Uh,
That's
there's
it.
more, but I'll stop.
MashaAllah.
That's
That's it.
that's a poem in praise of Imam Hanifa by Imam Shafi'i. So,
Oh, look at that. So
there's your
even Imam Shafi was praising him, rahimahullah.
right. So this is my favorite question. Umair Ibrahim has asked, can you please talk about shorts and calls? Um, also, real estate backed investments for return, especially if part of their fundings comes from questionable sources. I like this one. It's just like layer upon layer of like
Yeah.
haram and halal going on.
Yes. Look, if it's options and short selling and these things, right? Which I assume you mean by your shorts, right? Um, that's why I'm trying to stay focused right now, right? That plane is landing right now. Um, yeah, look, the asset class, first of all, is problematic from a Sharia perspective, right? So that's the first concern. the transaction wouldn't be valid, and therefore you'd have to pay zakat on the full value, that whatever you've paid, the premium you've paid for that particular option, because you are owed that. Now, if the other counterparty is not going to pay you, which is obviously the case, they're not going to pay you, then it's deemed that they've seized your wealth, so there's no zakat on that. But then you can't benefit from any return. It has to be purified. You can only take back your capital that you paid for the premium. That's the only thing, right? So that's that. When it comes to real estate backed investments for return, yeah. So look, you have to, when it's a real estate backed investment, it has to be that you're actually investing in real estate. You own the underlying real estate, and then depends what you're doing. Are you selling the real estate? Is it being flipped with an uplift in the price? Is it being leased out? If you're trading in the underlying property in the real estate, zakat will be due on the entire portfolio at its current value. If it's being rented and leased in the portfolio or the fund, then you'll only pay zakat on the dividends or rental income that you receive.
Mufti Sahib, on this, when there's a deployment of investment that takes place.
Mhm.
Now, in the background, these fund managers, some of it sometimes there's a bit of a lag, and you don't necessarily fully appreciate how much of a lag there is.
Mm.
And it can take, I don't know, sometimes, a few months before you're fully deployed. From your perspective, how, and you from your perspective, you've invested in real estate, let's say.
Yeah.
How should you approach the zakat on that?
But then you should just get information from the fund manager, right? Where are your funds currently sitting? Typically it'll be in a bank account, right? Potentially it could be an interest,
Yeah.
depending where you are in the world, right? But in the Middle East, in these part of places where there's Islamic banks available, the funds will be held in a wakala deposit or a mudaraba or a murabaha, and you just pay zakat on them because they're still your funds. And once they're deployed, then of course, then the zakat will change completely.
Um, does it make any difference that, legally you have transacted at this point and you now own like a legal or beneficial title in something, um, even though the transaction hasn't completed yet? Or do you, from zakat purposes, do you just follow the money?
It's a good question. It just depends because sometimes some legal engagements create obligations, right? So if there's an obligation and a commitment that's been created as a result of that engagement, then
Mm,
potentially you would discount that money because now it's owed to another party. So I guess it just depends where you are in that spectrum or in that particular sequence of events.
makes sense. Interesting. Uh, Hussein Patel, you mentioned council tax. Is that only for the month, or can that be calculated for the period of the tenancy?
Yes, look, how council tax works is the entire amount is due, but the council give you an installment payment plan, which can be 10 months or 12 months up to your option. But the entire amount is payable, right? They're just giving you some kind of benefit in that installment thing. So the entire council tax can be deducted. What I typically tell people is, and this is many people practice this way as well, they don't go and deduct every single thing. They just take the big debts that they have and the small thing, which is going to make £10 difference, £15 difference in your zakat at the end of the year. They just overlook it. But I mean, if you wanted to deduct it, you can deduct it. You can anything which has been incurred and is due within a 12 months can be deducted.
Makes sense. And when you say incurred, how what level of like certainty do we need for that? Because let's say that for a fact that you're gonna have to pay, I don't know, 20% tax on something, and it hasn't triggered just yet because let's say the tax year hasn't started, I don't know, something like that, but it's coming.
Mm.
How, can you use that or not?
Yeah, so the general advice is that incurred means it's been crystallized, right? Right now, would it be recorded on your balance sheet or not? If we were to do a snapshot calculation, that's what we're talking about.
Hmm. This is a good one. Aqsa Sultan. Everyone started using their proper names now. That's good to see. Aqsa is kind of a continuation of our previous conversation, but using a very live example, where if you're in the process of buying a house, and you've got this money sat there, um, do you need to pay zakat on that?
Yeah, this is a question which many people ask, and there's two views among scholars at present on this. One group of scholars are of the view that no, you can't. You'll still pay zakat on the money, right? Because you've just had a verbal kind of agreement, but there's no. I mean, you can both back out, and there's no obligation there. Even after your offer has been accepted, until your contracts are not exchanged, there's no kind of penalty or anything on you to really walk away. It'll just be deemed rude, I guess, and and not courteous. And because of that, you would pay zakat. However, there are some scholars of the view in the UK, and I'm not quoting any names here because I don't know if they still hold those views, but I read some fatwas last year and the year before that potentially you can deduct this because you've entered into a commitment to purchase something. Now it's just almost certain, and therefore you don't have to pay zakat on that. So my personal thing is more towards a second opinion, where I think there's a whole idea in fiqh called sawm shira, right, which is this idea of you haven't entered into a transaction yet, but you've taken possession of something, you've committed yourself to it, such that you bear the risk and you now are obliged. There's a commitment there, right? I think many a time that's what happens, because if you have a deposit for £100,000, many people, it takes them so many years to save up, especially in this day and age. So every pound counts when you're buying a house, solicitor fees, if it's a second home, stamp duty, it's just all of it. So I think there's definitely scope to explore the second opinion, and finally, I would just say, ask your local mufti or whichever scholar you follow, just to get that kind of like green light for your own, because it's an ibadah, it's zakat. You want to make sure that you're doing for your own worship everything properly.
Makes sense. HQ, I think we're back into the interesting names again. Salam for debt. For debt, you expect to pay like a 12-month 0% finance you mentioned. Do you just I think he means deduct 1 month's payment or the total remaining amount?
Yeah, this is a total amount, right? If you expect to pay within the 12 months the entire amount, you just take it off.
Zabk asks, is zakat due on savings held in an Islamic bank account as they are investing and are receiving profit on it?
That's right. Yeah. So zakat is due. You still own the money that they've invested. It's yours. So you'll pay zakat on the investment, and whatever profit has accrued to that date, and you own it, you pay zakat on it.
Wow, there's a lot of questions. Um, let's see. How do you calculate? This is a very broad one. How do you calculate zakat on pensions? How much time do you have, Hussein?
So look, defined benefit schemes, no zakat on that. You don't have to worry. So your typical like teacher's pension and these things, there's no zakat on that. Any kind of civil servant job, most of them are defined benefit schemes. It's your zakat your defined contribution schemes which are subject to zakat. Now, all you need to do is just work out the fund. Ask your HR department, what type of fund do I have? This is where Ibrahim and the team at IFG have been working so hard, creating awareness on pensions. Look, the first thing is we have to have Sharia compliant pensions. I mean, it still amazes me that so many of us, and I can't blame, I guess people don't know about this, right? That's the reality. But we need to have Sharia compliant pensions. That's the first thing that we need. Then the zakat question comes. So if you have a Sharia compliant pension, we typically advise like a proxy. So we looked at like 20 different funds, and we developed a proxy at NZF, and I was there back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And it was something like 26%. So if you have a Sharia compliant pension fund, just take 26% of the value of today. So if you have 10,000, take 26%, £2,600, pay 2.5%, and that's your zakat done for that year, right? Depending on, so if you have like a haram pension, if it's a pension in bonds and fixed income, pay zakat on the full amount, and you need purification as well. But you need to change that. So there's some proxies available if you go online. I think even IFG on your calculator and NZF's calculator, there's these pension proxies you can read more about and see more.
Brilliant. Vogue Maya is asking, so zakat is payable on Bitcoin and Ethereum?
Yeah, so if you're trading both, well, Ethereum, definitely, if you're trading, zakat is due. Bitcoin is always zakatable. That's my personal view. It's always zakatable. But Ethereum, depending what you're doing with it. If you are trading it, then yes. If you're just holding, then no.
Here's a left field question, Mufti Saab.
Can't guide.
So, given the banking crisis, and now that we've realized that the emperor wears no clothes, um, and we've loaned these people our money. Uh, Perhaps we develop a level of conviction that there's a banking crisis in the offing, and those loans have all gone bad or will potentially go bad. Uh, should we pay zakat on that?
Yes, you see, with the loans, you have this option to wait until you get paid back, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you wait. If you don't get paid back, so from the moment you lost hope, you just basically write it off. Don't have to worry.
But then when it comes back, when Silicon Valley Bank gets bailed out, then you have
Yeah, and that's totally unexpected that was going to happen because you had lost all hope. It's
yeah,
like it's a bonus for you.
yeah, fair enough. Umar Khan. So folks, you can see how much I'm trying to, try and reduce your zakat bill, even though you shouldn't necessarily try and do that. But I'm testing it out. Umar Khan, let's say I buy a stock because I think it's undervalued and would be happy to take the dividends and or buybacks, but then others see what I see and the price rises, so I sell. Is that trading from a zakat perspective?
Uh, I mean, no, because see, look, this is something which I'm not really maybe it's first time I'm expressing this here, right? So there's a first time for everything. But when it comes to trading shares, I don't think anybody trades shares outright. Like everybody, you'll only sell if certain indicators are met, certain benchmarks, certain things. Otherwise, you're holding. That's typically the way it is, right? You put a stop loss there. All your intentions are contingent upon something. So in many instances, most of us are not trading per se, where we are set on selling this. It's just where it's reactionary, it's reactive, it's not proactive trading in that sense. That's the way I just like to explain it. And so many a time, people always ask me this question: if you're not sure, you're holding it, perhaps you will, perhaps you won't, then there's no zakat on that. Or in terms of the whole value, just on the underlying.
I love this one. Market Beans. After paying so much UK tax, is Allah still expecting us to pay zakat? Isn't zakat mandatory under a Muslim regime with Muslim taxes?
Yeah, so first we have to lobby for less taxes, I guess. That's the first thing, right? And try to get some kind of like I mean, look, zakat and tax are completely two different things. Your taxes go to everywhere and anywhere based on the budget of the government, but zakat has specific categories. So yeah, we do pay zakat. We still have to pay zakat, but yeah, I feel your pain. We all feel the pain when you have to pay tax. I mean, it can be challenging, but it's something that we have to look at other means of, like permissible legal means to reduce our tax.
It's a very interesting question, isn't it? I was just thinking, is there a way of like changing your income so that you get distributions in a way that you don't
In
even
kind,
in kind, yeah. But even then, would you incur a income?
cap, yeah, it could be depending on what it is.
You probably would, wouldn't you, if it was an income? But maybe there is a way using a Dubai bank account or something.
Yeah, somewhere in Panama, maybe, perhaps, or something offshore would work.
So Wahid Hussein, uh, if I've invested in a property overseas which I'm still paying for in installments for the purpose of rental income once it's complete, do I owe zakat on it even if it hasn't been developed? I think he's bought a property off plan and he's paying for it slowly. I guess you just deduct whatever is due, right?
Yeah,
For
so
that. Yeah.
because you have payments due, you can deduct whatever's due. If it's within the next 12 months, you can deduct whatever's due.
Ammar Khattab says zakat evasion naughty naughty. Let's move on swiftly. The epicologist, uh, he says salam. I have a spare property which what's happened here? I have a spare property which is almost worth 800,000 outright owned property, no mortgage in the market. The tenants who live there is actually my own sister with her husband. Zakat?
Question mark.
Question mark.
I love that question. Zakat? Question mark. Like good. No, so there's no zakat on that because it's a spare property. I'm assuming you're not trading that or selling that. It's just a spare property of yours. It's spare, right? It's an additional residential property that you own. So there's no zakat on that whatsoever.
There you have it, the epicologist. Wahid Hussain is back. And if I pay zakat on it, do I have to pay for it in the currency where the property is? Oh, well, we've decided you don't have to pay zakat on it, haven't
That's
we?
right.
So you can crack on. And then LP LP9006. If I receive money from my child as a gift, who owns the money, and by extension, do I pay zakat on it, counting it towards my overall wealth?
Yeah, so I mean, a child who's a minor and immature can't gift their money. First of all, it's not valid, right? So if that was the case, the money still belongs to them. Just that's theirs, and so you would not pay zakat. It'd be their wealth. If you follow the Hanafi school, there's no zakat on it. If you follow a different school, there is zakat on it. If it's a mature child, so he's an adolescent, then zakat, the money becomes yours, and you'll be responsible for zakat on it.
Very interesting. I wonder if there's some kind of like thing where you gift it to the child then gifts it back to you. We won't go into that.
No.
Salam, Aslam P. Are you able to cover zakat and pension funds and how that? Okay, so we've done that already. You're late, Aslam. You need to catch up. Ammar Khattab. Means testing seems more accurate for nisab as cost of living is different in economically developed countries.
No, fair point. Fair point. What I just say is use a golden sub then. Right? It's
Hmm.
just a simple way. It's like means testing is just too difficult. Like who does it? Do you do it? Do we have a like centralized? We have already so many problems, zakat at a more central or at a more institutional level, right? How are we going to sort this kind of problem out? So right now, Nisab works practically and pragmatically very simple to operate with.
Mama Dia, in an investment account where money is invested there monthly, which amount do we take zakat from? The end of the year amount value with whatever the present value. Thanks.
Yeah, so well, it just depends on the type of investment, right? So if it's a murabaha or something where you are owed an outstanding balance, receivables, you'd pay on the full outstanding balance. If it's something like an ijara or wakala or mudaraba where you're currently investing, you'd pay on what the current value is.
Oh, this is an interesting one. National Zakat Foundation itself is asking, do I pay zakat on my crypto only after I've sold for capital gain?
Well, you're a charity, so. But anyway, uh,
Do
yeah,
charities have to pay zakat?
yeah, no. So I mean, they're just an agent on behalf of the payers, right? So there's that is the zakat that's being paid, right? So you don't get zakat on zakat. It's like a derivative of zakat, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so you don't have to pay zakat will be paid, uh, you know, like any other asset. Yearly on the crypto, you'll pay zakat as and when. But obviously, this is for people who pay zakat.
Here's an idea. Does that technically mean that the amilina alayha, because they're receiving zakat money, they don't have any zakat due on their salaries?
Yes, look, it's a good question. So the question is, who are amilin, right? I think that's definitely a question, and this whole thing. Um, so look, amilin classically were employed by the government, but they represented the fuqara and the poor people. You know, the scholars they mention, an amil has like a hybrid. His zakat, the zakat that he receives has a hybrid nature to it. Half of it is in the ruling of being a wage, and half of it is in the ruling of being zakat. That's why you can't get somebody from the family of the Prophet ﷺ to be an amil, because there's an element of it being zakat, right? And there's another element of it being a wage. Now, why? Who is paying the amil is the question. So the scholars write it's actually the fuqara. So through the proxy of the government appoints its amils to work on behalf of the poor people to collect zakat. That's how it's always worked. That's why even myself, uh, I'm personally not inclined to the idea of charities being amilin, but they can be wakil on behalf of poor people, and then they can take a wakala fee, like an admin fee. Because even the amilin were pure wakil. They were always wakil. They were not acting independently, never. So some kind of governance is always required there. And I guess that's what the classical amilin structure gave. And there was a contractual agreement with the
Mm.
poor people through the proxy of the government.
So even at that time, they pay zakat.
Yeah, they would pay. I mean, that would become their own their wealth, right, and their salary. So they'd also pay zakat on what they have.
Okay. Yasser Adabi, I'm not sure I fully understand your question, so perhaps I'll move on to the next one. Khalid Dadi, if I have loaned my money from my family and still owe this money, but incapable of paying it all off straight away. Do I still have to pay zakat on the money I have in my savings?
Yeah, so if you've borrowed money, then you can, and this is a very common thing, and this is something which I guess we need to make more, like, raise awareness on, right? Even IFG, I think something for IFG as well, definitely, is we have so many interpersonal borrowing and lending, but there's no contractual paper, there's no paperwork, there's no documentation. It's just like, yeah, pay me back whenever you want. And when it comes time to paying, the person who's borrowed, the borrower doesn't have the money. So then that creates a friction. Just a couple of days ago, I was dealing with a similar case. So this is something which we're as a community, when it's especially family, it's almost like a taboo to have a contract between family members. It's something that you frown upon. How can you? I'm your brother or your sister, right? No, but you need to. That's what Allah faktubu. Allah tells us that if you transact and there's a debt transaction, faktubu, you write it down. It's really important because this causes a lot of problems, especially nowadays when everybody's calling up their funds and they need the money. Nobody's willing to pay because of money's not there. So that's the first thing, right? Always be very clear when you're going to pay off. Have that all written out, agreed with the lender. When it comes to your zakat, you can deduct whatever you intend to pay within the 12 months to your family members.
Kasajja Rashid Saliman asks, is it possible to do zakat more than one time?
Yeah, I mean, if you pay extra, then that's one or two things. It's either an advance for the following year, which is fine, you can do, or alternatively, it's a sadaqah. So it just depends on your intention, really, how you are treating it.
Or could you pay, like, let's say over a certain period of time, you just regularly pay zakat?
Yeah, you could do that. The only thing then is just to make sure that you have that one date in the year. Just make sure on that day you've actually paid the correct amount.
Hussein's asking I think he missed it, but why is Ethereum being held long term, not zakatable?
Because it's not in the ruling of any zakat. It's not gold, it's not silver, it's not functioning as money. It's purely a utility token powering the Ethereum platform for smart contracts and creating decentralized applications.
All right, let me have a look through the other questions because I want to ask you an exciting topic instead, which is Mufti Saab, 0% admin fees. Good or bad?
Look, admin fees are required everywhere. I think what needs to happen, there has to be a transfer. As I mentioned, for me, the whole Amilin thing, right, it was a very particular context, the way it worked. A charity cannot be independently Amilin. That's what I'm personally inclined to. Or else everybody can open up a business and say, look, I'm an Amil today. I've just taken £10 of zakat and done, right? But no, there's actual framework to it. There was a governance to it, and it was representation in the Amil. In fact, the Amil had power and authority to enforce zakat collection, which is also missing in today's kind of practices. So we typically use the wakala idea, but it has to be done properly, implemented properly. So admin fees are we understand it's needed, it's required. So that should be a separate, and it should be above and beyond your zakat. It shouldn't be part of the zakat.
Mufti, what's your general experience been of how Muslims should conduct themselves when you have these kind of controversies come up, and there's usually a bit of a debate around this? How should we approach it as, like, just ordinary folk?
Yeah, look, it's a fiqh. At the end of the day, it's a real issue. And look, we've been in this field now for some time discussing these issues. They are not going to go away, right? Look, everybody just follow the view that you have. It's a fiqhi difference. It's a fiqhi difference. That's the reality. It doesn't mean you break bonds, you burn bridges, you have enmity for people who have an opposing view. That's a view. As long as it's a valid view, there's a valid, like, fiqhi interpretation of what's happening. It's been articulated. It's not just somebody just randomly saying things. And if they've presented their view, you might not agree with the reasoning. That's fine. You have your reasoning as a scholar. That's how it works, right? But you respect. There's always respect, decorum. There's adab in our deen. Have love for the other scholars and everybody. The fiqh will be the fiqh. There'll always be difference. There's difference of opinion in everything, right? Like the way we perform salah, there's a difference of opinion. According to, it's makruh for us, makruh tahrimi for us to recite Surah Al-Fatiha behind the imam. Whereas according to others, it's compulsory to do. Now look at the spectrum there, the difference, right? But nobody fights over that. Same thing you look in Islamic finance. I always say this, right? The differences in Islamic finance is a fiqhi difference. Wherever you sit, whether you like certain products or you don't. Just like we don't fight over whether the witr is 1 rakat or 3 rakat. Islamic finance is the same thing. If you come out tomorrow about pro or against, it's a fiqhi difference at the end of the day. Just it's okay. There's no need to raise the blood pressure or to relax. You're the view. It's not permissible. You don't need to campaign against people who say it's permissible. There's no need for it. It's a fiqhi difference. That's the beauty of it.
I was whilst you were speaking on the topic of fiqh difference. I remember a long time ago when I learned about how in the Hanafi madhab, if you have like a very clear action outside of the salah after the tashahhud, basically the salah is done, because after the tashahhud the salah is done, right?
Oh yes, yes.
So one day I just want to end my salah as like an imam. I just get up and like give a clap and then walk out.
Yeah, but then the salam is wajib, right? So then you'll have to do some kind of like.
I'll be like, "Assalamu alaikum, guys, I'm off."
Right, so yeah. But see, according to others, that's for us, we'd understand that there's so many things like this. And the beauty is if we all study, honestly, we all, without exception, doesn't matter where you are in your journey, we all study, it'll bring within us this kind of humility, understanding that we don't know ourselves. There's so much to learn. We know very little, and that'll bring humility and allow us, it'll just raise our tolerance and our kind of like, keep our mouths more closed and open, right? We speak less, read more. That's the best thing we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Ammar, where's he gone? Ammar Khattab asked, says, admin fees are okay, excessive CEO salaries are not. Ammar, we'll go to a question, but why don't you give us a number? What is an appropriate salary? And I'll be interested to hear that. And Mufti Sahib, I'll be interested to hear your point of view on that as well. Don't answer that right now. Let's see what Ammar says first.
Yeah.
And then we'll each reveal, because I've noted down metaphorically my number as well. So let's see what Ammar Khattab has to say. Let's see. Let's take a couple more questions. So there's one on HPPs, HQ. So if you have an Islamic HPP with rent and acquisition payments, do you deduct the next 12 months payments as you're technically contracted to pay?
Yeah, so you would, yeah. The rent is debt that you need to pay. It's contracted. You're contracted to pay that. You have to pay. Some people think that rent is like this monthly rolling thing, but it's not. It's actually, rent can come in many forms. Either the entire amount is due, or it's a very flexible engagement where there's no contract and you just pay as you go. In the HPP, it's actually something you need to pay off, and so you can deduct the full 12 months.
Brilliant. Ammar Khattab asks, if I've already paid zakat on company shares at a higher valuation, and a few weeks later the shares have revalued at 60% lower value, do I pay less zakat in the following year? I guess you're not really supposed to pay zakat on shares anyway, right?
Yeah, not on the full value. It's just if the shares are underlying assets, you'll pay zakat on.
Yeah. Tariq, do I have to pay zakat on pension AVCs? If so, how does it work?
Yeah, so additional voluntary contributions, if I'm not mistaken.
I see.
Yeah, so you'll also direct those payments to particular funds. So again, you look at which fund are you paying into, yes, your voluntary contribution that you're making, and then you, based on that fund and it's like net zakatable assets, what it's composed of, you'll pay zakat accordingly. So if it's all in equity, as I mentioned, the proxies that are there, or if it's in property, then you just look at the cash element typically because it's a property fund.
I love the ecologist. I think he's got sunglasses in his picture as well. He's asked, zakat, okay, student loan, question mark.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a riddle and rhyme for me. I'm not really sure on, but I guess if we try to decipher that, it's trying to say, student, are you pay? Can you deduct student loan, or do you pay a student loan? But I mean, there's a bursary element to it, the grant element,
Yeah,
right? And then there's the kind of like repayment of student loans, right?
yeah. I think he's made a typo. He meant zakat on student loan, question mark.
Oh yeah, Yeah, that's probably more reasonable and wise. Like the K and N on the keyboard are not so far apart either.
Yeah, I just checked that. So,
So
and he's got form as well. Like, I mean, this is because this is where you have to study. In the hadith books, you have to look at how Muslim and Bukhari kind of their methodology, and the epichologist methodology in the chat previously has been very similar to this, where he will ask a question without actually framing it as a question, but this is actually a question.
this is like the mystery. So yeah, look, if it's on student loans, if you've taken borrowed money as a bursary, then zakat is payable. That becomes your cash. Then effectively, you're not going to pay that at all. So zakat is due upon that money. If you have to repay, then of course there's no zakat on that. If it's a loan for your tuition,
Yeah.
there's no zakat on that. That's been paid off to your educational provider. You don't need to pay zakat on that.
Right. Let's see if we've had a number.
Oh yeah, I think it is 50K. He says 50K in London.
50K.
Depends on the number of hours worked as well.
Oh my days. Mufti Saab, what's your number?
You know what? For me, it's all about competence. I don't think number. Look, to be honest, numbers. The more competent, it makes a difference. You pay somebody 20,000, somebody 60,000. It makes a big difference, right? The skill set, competence. But I've seen CEOs ranging from, honestly, I've seen from 30K to 80K. Perhaps I've seen a bit more than that, 90K as well. Just depends on their experience and what they bring. Because I've worked with people, CEOs, who their presence makes a change. Like, humans can drive an organization, and you're willing to pay that for that person's value, because he could go to any other firm and potentially earn more. So he's already made a sacrifice by coming to the charitable sector, and you don't want him to be worse off. Of course, he's doing it for Allah. Why else would he come here? Right? So he's already made that decision. So it's not about his intention. We don't even look at the intention, but he's providing a service. He's owed a fair remuneration for that service.
Very interesting. So my number depends on the size of the charity, but I think if it's a reasonable sized charity, a few million in turnover, and it's a competent, decent CEO, the number I had instinctively in my head was somewhere between 75K and 100K, I think.
Mm.
And if it's a very large charity, like turning over tens of millions with a particularly significant budget, I think, even 150K isn't ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, they're adding a lot of they would be adding a lot of value. Definitely, they wouldn't be there if they wouldn't be adding value. In other words, right?
Yeah.
It's the track record, the experience, and when you sit with such CEOs and you hear the strategy and what they're thinking, what they're doing, then you can understand why that value is there.
Yeah. And if you think about it another way, I was thinking about it. I mean, this is one of the curses or one of the challenges of the Muslim charity sector as well. A lot of our charities are, somewhat, the cult of personality, in that we will typically have most charities will start with, one person who's historically just driven it and got it to where it is. And you take that one person out, that charity is nothing, which is both, a challenge because that's not, sustainable long term, but also it's indicative of how important sometimes key people are, to the success of a charity. And we can think of many examples like.
Yeah, 100%. The only thing I'd add here is that, look, we all need to act upon the sunnah wherever we are, CEO or not CEO, which is, being careful, having that caution with money, always trying to take that route, which is that you don't want to go for the lavish lifestyle. So if you don't need to travel first class, these people make these comments. Oh yeah, but these CEOs travel, business class and first class here, and they do this, they do that, 5-star hotels. You should live a lifestyle which is simple, modest. That's how the person lived his life, right? That's our role model. So as much as you can, we live a more simple life as a CEO. And I've seen some CEOs do that, right? That they're CEOs, they're being paid well. They'll pay all the expenses from their own earnings, right? And that's remarkable. That really is leadership. When you work with such CEOs, it really instills some kind of a behavior within you that there's a mission here, and you're living the prophetic way. And I think that's really important. So don't look at the kind of purely the fiqh thing. That's the baseline. Let's aim for the sunnah, the prophetic way, which is the optimal point. That's everything, even in Islamic finance. I'm just writing on this right now. I'm actually writing a book, Islamic Finance 2.0, prophetic finance, right? Which is, I think we talk about too much what's permissible, optimization and optimality comes with the sunnah. How would the Prophet do this? What do we learn from his teachings? Because that's what the sunnah is about. The sunnah is the optimal way to live life in every aspect. So really that's what we should be aiming for as individuals and wherever we are in whichever sector.
Jazakallah khair, Mufti Saab. We're going to take one final question, and I need to take this question because I think it's the best question of the night. Zabk asks, can I receive zakat as a mujahid if I'm a keyboard warrior?
That's an NO. And don't be a keyboard warrior as well.
Zabk is standing in the ribat somewhere.
Is it a MacBook or is it?
I don't know.
Look,
So Zabk, unfortunately, we can't pay you zakat. I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? So fi sabilillah, and these days you've got cyber warfare going on, haven't you? So in a Muslim, let's say you've got a Muslim country that employs some of its mujahideen for cyber warfare, you could pay for that, right?
yeah, perhaps you could. Yeah, there's definitely scope. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how Muslim countries how they allocate their zakat and they look at their budget. So like Saudi Arabia or I don't know who collects centrally, right? And see do they how they allocate their zakat funds.
Very interesting. At the risk of getting into trouble, wasn't there like some kind of hack that came out of the Middle East recently? But anyway, that it would be outrageous if that was used, was with zakat money. Mufti Saab, let's I guess let's wrap up, and final words as people head into the iftar period. I'm not saying it's iftar now, guys, by the way, so don't break your fast. But as we approach our iftar, any final words to people?
I was about to say kafara is on you then for everyone. Like you take everyone's kafara on you and just pay. Look, final words. I would just say, look, treat every day of Ramadan as a day in and of itself. Don't see Ramadan as one sprint. Ramadan is 30 sprints. Every day is a new day, it's a new opportunity. I think that's really important because what happens, we get this dip this time of in Ramadan. As you come into the middle 10 days, there's a dip there, then again we're on a high. Every day is a new day. If you messed up today or messed up yesterday, it doesn't matter. You're human, you'll mess up. We're human. We're still human. Even in Ramadan, we're human. And that's in fact our weaknesses become more exposed in Ramadan because there's no shaitan, there's no distractions, yet we mess up. That just shows how low we are and how weak we are. And so with that humility, with that weakness, you go to Allah and say, Allah, you gave me Ramadan. Even in Ramadan, I've messed up. Right? So this truly shows how weak I am. There's no hope for me except you. You forgive me. Right? And that will just bring a different flavor. Where look, you've put all your cards on the table, right? An open book to Allah. This is who I am. You help me. That will transform your life. So treat every day of Ramadan as a Ramadan. It's a new Ramadan basically. Right? That's why the scholars mentioned every day is a sabab in and of itself for Ramadan, for fasting. Right? There's a whole discussion amongst the fuqaha on this, and it's very interesting. So every day is an opportunity. Don't worry about what happened yesterday. You can right here and now you can change your life. It's just all in the heart and the mind. You make your intention, it's done with Allah. It's simple as that.
Subhanallah. Jazakallah khair, Mufti Saab. Jazakallah khair to everyone who tuned in. All of the really insightful, really interesting questions, and inshallah, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gives us barakah in this month and guides us to the straight path, and helps us take advantage of the rest of this month, and give our zakat on time, as it should be, and and more on top of that, from a sadaqah perspective as well. Once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.